But good afternoon, everybody. And I'm Colin Steinman. I'm Curator of Education here at the Georgia Museum of Art, and I'm so pleased to welcome you all to today's program, a curator talk on the exhibition Echoes from Abroad, American Art from the collection of Barbara Guillaume, with Jeff Richmond-Moll, who is our Curator of American Art, and museum intern and recent UGA graduate, Meghan Gerig. So I'm really excited to hear from both of them about this wonderful exhibition. And before we get started, I just wanted to briefly go over some housekeeping information about our Zoom program today. We are in a webinar sort of setup, so you aren't going to see any of the other participants in the audience, but you will see our presenters today. We will have time for questions for our speakers at the end of their presentation today. So at any time during the presentation, I invite you to leave any questions for Meghan or Jeff in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You should see that there. If you have any questions or concerns regarding technical logistics or need help troubleshooting anything with Zoom, you can leave those in the chat box. So I'll be logged on throughout the program today to assist with those. So any questions for Meghan or Jeff in the Q&A box, tech troubleshooting questions will go in the chat. That's all that I've got to share, so I will hand it over to Jeff and Meghan for today's program.
Thank you, Colin. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this afternoon or whatever time of day it is from wherever you are. As Colin said, I'm Jeff Richmond-Moll, and I'm the Curator of American Art here at the museum. Excited to talk with Meghan Gerig about her work on this exhibition, Echoes from Abroad. As Colin mentioned, Meghan is a recent graduate of the University of Georgia. She received her BA this past spring in art history and a minor in English and a certificate in museum studies. She's been working at the museum since January of 2020. Mostly working with our director, Bill Island, and has also done a lot of great work with the Special Collections Library at UGA. So she's contributed greatly to the university, and I wanted to mention too that that work is being recognized as she heads off in a few weeks to the Folk Pottery Museum of Northeast Georgia, which she will be directing. That museum is just, I don't know my North Georgia mountain geography well, so it's either up or down the road from Helen, Georgia, for those of you who are aware of North Georgia towns. So we're excited that she is going to be close by and continuing her museum career. So just to kind of give you a little bit of preview of what we'll be doing, I'm going to pass things over in a moment to Meghan for her to talk about how her work began on Barbara Guillaume's collection, and then I'll jump in and sort of share how I came in to help with mounting the show as it came to life in our galleries late this past spring. It is still open and will be open until mid-August if you haven't been in to see it. And then we'll be talking about a number of works from the collection, which at the end of 2019, Barbara Guillaume, who's one of our board members here at the museum, lent to us for really exactly this kind of thing, an opportunity for teaching, study, research, to really engage the undergraduate and graduate community here at the university, which is just such an exciting thing that we at the museum, and for me as a curator, we can do to help foster this kind of really important practical experience and scholarly projects among students. So I guess without further ado, I'll hand it over to Meghan, and she can share a bit about where this all began.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for that introduction. It's been a pleasure to work here with you at the museum, as well as everyone that I've gotten the pleasure to meet and work with here. It's been a very good teaching experience, like you said, and I look forward to talking about this beautiful exhibition. So as Jeff mentioned, I began working with the museum's director, Bill Island, back in January of 2020. And to my own surprise, my very first task was to piece together an exhibition involving works from the Guillaume collection. And after looking at the diverse and awe-inspiring work of the collection, there was one theme that we kind of agreed on that pervaded the intimate collection, and that was inspiration from abroad. My initial research on the project proved that researching these artists would be a challenge, as many of them, their works and stories have been overlooked. But after some diligent work, finding resources made each one of these works and every piece of information that I could find that much more special. Indeed, I believe I exhausted every Marquise Who's Who publication we have here in the library. And I recall flooding the library for scan requests, which sometimes returned only a sentence of relevant information. But I am forever grateful for the opportunity, as it really did prepare me for my upper level coursework and beyond that in my career. And additionally, Guillaume's collection gave me the opportunity to shine light on artists who have been left out of the art history canon. And I felt honored truly to join a larger movement that reconsiders the greatness of great artists. And throughout all this research, I also unexpectedly gained an appreciation of American artists, which is something I do look forward to going forward in my career, and I look forward to sharing here with you all today. And in addition to their international influence, these works reflect a tumultuous time in American history. This collection and the art history surrounding it reflects the era quite well, demonstrating the shifts in genre and eclectic interests of American artists. And I hope that you will also find that these artists were not copyists. With that being said, many of the artists did spend time in Europe and abroad in South America, immersing themselves in international culture and art. As the title of the exhibition would suggest, these works reflect some of the practices, ideas, and techniques of their time in Europe and South America. And again, I'm very grateful for Jeff and Bill's guidance, and I hope you will enjoy this exhibition as much as I did, and also get the chance to see it in person. And I'll hand it off to Jeff.
Great, thanks, Megan. So as Megan mentioned, this theme about echoes from abroad really came to the surface through her research, and then as I was looking at the great work that she had done in producing really all of the exhibition texts from the research she had done to shine some light on some artists that I knew, and then others that were new discoveries for me. And so any good exhibition has to have a cohesive theme and a sort of logical progression in space. And so with Echoes from Abroad, we see sort of the what we would expect in this period of the late 19th into the early 20th century of the critical importance of Europe in the formation of American art, American artistic experimentation, the formation of these sort of styles and movements within the United States that many artists were bringing back with them after their travels abroad. Because even in the early 20th century, most American artists felt a pull to Europe in order to further professionalize themselves as working artists. But what we also see, and as we'll see as we go through the examples, is exchange that is happening in other ways beyond this typical transatlantic Europe-US exchange that, as I said, was so pivotal to the creative activities of American artists. We have artists who were looking to Latin America, who were drawing inspiration also from Asia, whether a sort of an imagined Orient or from these kind of actual exchanges with certain artistic traditions in Asia. And so we'll get to that later. But here, for those of you who have not been, or as a reminder for those of you who have, here is the installation in our galleries. As I said, you know, from bringing the show from the page to the wall, one of the things that seemed to make the most sense to also capture, I think, as Meghan said, this kind of diversity of artistic activity in these decades. Things are, the works are grouped by genre. So we have landscapes, the Alice Sheila watercolors, which you see double hung to the right of that harbor scene, in a way being, one of them being a landscape, shifting over with that watercolor on the top into sort of portraiture or figuration, and then moving down through the end into still life painting. And it's these juxtapositions of artists who are all working within, you know, several decades of each other, that you see this diversity of output among American artists who all seem to be carrying these foreign forms of artistic expression in many different directions. Here's a view the other way where we can get a better glimpse of those still life paintings on the right. But as I said, I mean, Meghan made my job very easy in terms of the wonderful work she had done in researching these artists and producing some great texts, which you see there in the labels on the wall. So we'll move into the individual examples from the collection. And Meghan and I are going to just sort of go back and forth and share about specifically the American works that are on loan to us from Barbara Guillaume's collection. There are several European works, but again, for sort of the cohesiveness of the installation and the theme of Echoes from Abroad, it really made sense to focus on American artists and sort of the impact of this international exchange on artists of the United States. So we'll start with Otto Bierhaus. This is a handsome cab in Grand Army Plaza in Central Park, New York. I think you see just in the background there, if I'm getting my Central Park geography right, kind of above the hitch between the horse and the carriage, the outline of a sculptural form. And I'm pretty sure that is Augustus St. Gaudens's Sherman memorial with Victory parading in front of him. So we're put in a very specific place in New York City with this painting. Very particular kind of moment of the day, as if perhaps it's just rain, or we have maybe even melting snow that is pooling on the streets. Bierhaus clearly here is looking to French Impressionism, and we see the long legacy of that style decades later. Really, Impressionism having such a lasting impact on American art, even if American artists were a bit delayed in picking it up. The painting reminds me of also other things happening around the turn of the century, like Alfred Stieglitz's photographs of New York. And if that is indeed snow in the background, which the white blanket on the ground makes me think it is, Stieglitz's shot of this another kind of carriage moving down Fifth Avenue, which I believe that's Fifth Avenue in the background, if that's Sherman on his horse on the statue. I sort of found this to be a great comparison, because photography was also so crucial to the work of Impressionist painters in France, and then to the American artists who brought it back to the United States, capturing, again, this kind of specific moment in time a moment of weather and meteorology, but also, at least in Stieglitz's painting, a picture of the modernity of an exploding New York City in this time period. Beer halls is kind of alluding to New York at this time, but the impressionist style and the focus on a hansom cab as a sort of more by 1925, the mid-20s, being a sort of more traditional or old-fashioned form of transportation. So the language of Impressionism among American artists was a way to kind of not obscure, but cloud a little bit the modernity of this country at this time with something a little more nostalgic. I also wanted to pull a painting from art collection, George Looks's Jerry the Plaza Cabbie from the same decade, which shows Looks and other ashcan painters' continued interest in people like the cabbies who drove the carriage you see in the Beer Hall's painting. Jerry was a Plaza Hotel hansom cab driver. Again, right in the exact same spot, really, where the Beer Hall's painting was done. And we sort of see, again, this kind of the interest in this kind of subject matter among artists working in very different styles, but all at the same moment. Megan, you want to take over with this one?
Yeah, so this is by Frank S. Herman, who was born in New York in the middle of the 19th century, 1866 to be specific, but he spent a majority of his life in Europe. He spent some time in Paris and in Germany. In Paris, he studied under Bouguereau, who you've probably heard before, and he was known for naturalistic portraits, but Herman himself would be recognized for his idealized landscapes rather than naturalistic ones. And indeed, actually, his German comrades referred to him as the tulip field painter. And he was close friends with Alfred Stieglitz, whose image Jeff just pointed out, whose photograph. And I think a connection to photography can be drawn here as well. The atmospheric effects that Herman employs are reminiscent of a photograph that has been exposed for a period of time, capturing the wind or perhaps the falling snow around the trees in this painting, which ultimately creates this sort of blurry effect that we get around the branches and the trunks of the tree. I found Union Square to be quite contradictory. For one, most of the painting is filled with these trees or tree trunks, perhaps emphasizing the touch of nature in a busy city, but the trees themselves are barren and carry snow. Additionally, there's a large skyscraper which stands in the background, literally towering over nature, perhaps a metaphor for man versus nature. And the lights twinkling in the skyscraper indicate that the building is alive with activity and represents a city, and even more so, a nation dedicated to industry. And I think we also get kind of that essence of nostalgia that Jeff pointed out in the beer halls. Yeah. Oh, and here we have a Charles S Kalin, this is Rockport Harbor. And Colin was a member of the Cape Ann Art Colony, along with many other art colonies, but that was his most prominent one. He joined the flocks of artists who found beauty in Massachusetts landscapes. Many American artists lived there, and specifically in Gloucester, Massachusetts, but also in Rockport when Gloucester got too busy and too popular. Colin, however, took a more personal approach to capturing these popular scenes. In fact, he was known to frequent outdoor areas in Rockport where he felt closer to nature personally, And there are multiple accounts of him just walking in the woods and doing his work. And he was able there to paint in private. And Rockport itself was known as a very picturesque, ideal, and accessible environment for many artists, which I think is kind of a key part of this time period in American art. And in Rockport, Kalin had found, or he had bought an old fisherman's shack, which he used as a studio. And this endeavor was funded by his success as a lithographer, excuse me. And his shack was situated in such a way that he had a perfect view of the Rockport Harbor, which is the subject of this painting. And that allowed the scene to become the subject of many of his paintings, similar to perhaps the Mont Saint-Victoire of Cezanne. The sharp contrasting colors in this painting derive from a technique called divisionism, which is similar to pointillism, except there's a lot broader brushstrokes here, as you can see beneath the boats. And the colors here create a shiny surface on top of the body of water, which makes it appear as though it's been touched by the light and is shimmering as it kind of sits, as the boats sit on the dock. And yeah.
So here we have a work that was not in the exhibition, but I wanted to point it out. This is Colin Campbell Cooper's Chatham Square in New York City. This is a work on paper, and what we have here is a view of this square sort of on the edge of modern day Chinatown in Lower Manhattan. These beautiful kind of Victorian and brownstone buildings in the background, with this symbol of modernity in the foreground, the sweeping curve of an elevated rail line. Not only that, but this kind of just this flurry of signage painted on the sides of buildings, mounted on the front, running down like lighted marquees and advertisements across the rail lines for products like Coca-Cola, and really again with these trolley cars at street level, you have these kind of stacks of modern technologies of transportation that are cutting through the kind of the old streets of Lower Manhattan. Cooper created this as a study, as I said, for a much larger oil on canvas, which is also in Barbara Guillaume's collection, not here in Georgia, but elsewhere. And we see details here that aren't in the study, but make their way into the painting with these puffs of smoke, which just kind of add that element of industry, mirroring the haze of clouds that we see in the background. Again, the way that Cooper is using light and color and weather shows this ongoing impact of elements of Impressionism in American art. But here, rather than obscuring modernity, showing it in the bright light of day.
So here are those two Alice Shilley works that we kind of looked at briefly earlier. You may have heard the name Alice Shilley. She was born in Columbus, Ohio, but like many of these artists had exposure in New England, in America. And she studied under William Merritt Chase, who will come up again in this exhibition while she was in New York. And she won many awards for her watercolor paintings. She mostly stuck to genre paintings, focusing on markets, women, children, and landscapes as the subjects of her watercolors. And she had a variety of influences, which I think are evident in these two works. She was inspired by the Fauvists, in addition to artists like Whistler and local Mexican artists, because she visited Mexico frequently, making it subject of a lot of her work. And I would actually like to here draw a comparison to the French Fauvists with the second one, the Indian church. So this connection may not seem obvious at first glance. Duran's painting here, his forms being far more abstract and his subject less pastoral. But I do think that the comparison between Alice Shelley and the French Fauvists should not go unmentioned or looked at in depth. Excuse me. Indeed, the brilliant colors and flat figures and simplified forms in both of these works call to mind the French Fauvists, who were working just a decade earlier than Shelley. I am particularly reminded of the landscapes of Andre Duran, such as this one here, the bridge at Lepec. Color is the subject of the Indian church at Cuernavaca, as it is for Duran as well. Indeed, the color and the harsh outlines make up the form rather than depth, which is something that we see with the grand old masters that we look at. And the colors of Shelley's may not be as bold and daring as the colors you would find in this Duran or a Matisse, which I think could perhaps be ascribed to the difference in media. Shelley's working in watercolor here, whereas Duran and most of the Fauvists were working oil on canvas, but it can also be attributed to gender differences and just location. Yet both of these works still venture past naturalistic depiction. And even though we have the suggestion of some shadow with Shelley's figures, we are rid of any indication of atmospheric perspective. And Cuernavaca is known as the city of eternal spring and is portrayed as primitive and pastoral in Shelley's work, emphasizing its ruralness compared to the neighboring Mexico City, and for my comparison purposes, Lepec here. Maybe the wild beast impression that was assigned to the Fauvists is not as pronounced in Shelley's work, but I do see Shelley as, I do see her vivid vision that she imposed on the native people of Mexico in these two works especially.
So here we have painting by Edward August Bell, excuse me. Bell also studied with William Merritt Chase, who, as Meghan said, we'll get to momentarily. And like Bierhals, which I did not mention with his painting, but he studied, Bell and Bierhals were both among the American artists who studied in Munich. And we often recognize the importance of France and especially Paris, as well as before that Italy, but among a certain generation of American artists, training in Munich or elsewhere in Germany was crucial to a formation of a certain form of American painting. So Bell's work is indebted to a number of other European artists, and I wanted to bring in two comparisons. One is James Abbott McNeill Whistler. We see on the right Whistler's Symphony in White from the National Gallery in Washington. With both of these paintings together, I think we see how Bell is looking to the precedent of Whistler and of the aesthetic movement for color. And again, Bell's painting is called Blue and Brown, parentheses, Contemplation. How color can be, can evoke a certain mood, how color itself is a form of expression in and of itself. Whistler's use of white here shows again the kind of expressive potential of a single individual color. So Bell is looking to Whistler for that. I also look at that reflective tabletop and think of other American artists, even someone like John Singleton Copley with his beautiful lacquered mahogany tabletops that he includes in his paintings that have these dazzling reflections of the sitter in them. I don't know if Bell was thinking of Copley or not, but it just comes to mind. And then, of course, being this kind of window scene, a single female figure in space, certainly would remind us of Vermeer and his women by windows. This is, again, maybe a hypothetical comparison as opposed to Whistler, but Vermeer's Woman Reading a Letter from the Rijksmuseum, we see how well before Whistler, restricting a composition to a kind of small slice of color and tone, Vermeer too, blue and brown can create, and then the use of light and shadow can create a kind of expressive potential that again also relates to the kind of the mood of the sitter, this notion of contemplation that seems to go across both pictures, and one reading the letter, one staring at a vase of flowers.
So here's that William Merritt Chase that we referenced. And as you know now, William Merritt Chase was a teacher, but before that, he was born in America. And early on in his career, he had a deep love for Europe and European culture. And he did a European tour, but settled in Munich and enrolled actually in the Munich Academy, where he felt inspired by many different movements of European art, particularly the painterly style of the great masters of Europe, such as Peter Paul Rubens. And in Europe, Chase had the chance to become close friends with many contemporary artists like Edward Manet and fellow American artists like John Singer Sargent. And I reference these artists in inspiration because I think through even the sketch, Chase's style is characteristic of these influences. The strokes and texture of his sketch are reminiscent of Manet, while the atmospheric qualities of the work and the doll-like features of the subject's face remind me of Whistler, like the example we just looked at. And Chase, like I mentioned, found much success as a teacher and taught many renowned artists, some of which were women like Georgia O'Keeffe and Alice Shelley. And in his teaching career, he emphasized mastering the techniques of old and new masters, noting that an artist who can do this can make anything attractive. Yeah.
So here we have two still lifes by George Thomas Hobbs. These, clear. I almost want to say now for something slightly different, because Hobbs seems to be looking to a much earlier tradition in both European and American art. These beautiful tabletop still lifes of fruit, nuts, this kind of oyster shell bowl that the pomegranates sit in. Hobbs is placing his work again in a much longer history, and I think of two in particular examples when we're thinking about the subjects of these pictures. His still life with pomegranates. The still life tradition in the United States, at least in the early 19th century, has a number of sources, including Dutch still lifes, but one maybe less known precedent for American still life painting from really, a century before Hobbs is Spanish still life painting. And this still life with pomegranates, here split open to reveal the seeds, This is a kind of precedent for what Hobbs is doing with his illusionistic tabletop that seems to come right to the edge of the picture in the kind of lower quarter of his canvas. The kind of symbolic aspects of fruit, perhaps maybe less important to Hobbs, but in the case of this the Spanish painting, grapes and pomegranate seeds, among other things, in the picture, alluding to the kind of a religious language revolving around grapes and wine and pomegranate seeds, and the pomegranate juice having to do with being symbols of Christ and his passion. And then the other comparison is to a generation of still life painters in the US through the middle to the later part of the 19th century, artists like Robert Duncanson, who were also interested in things like oranges and pineapples, these kind of tropical fruits, which demonstrate the imperial reach of the United States beginning in the mid 19th century. The importation of exotic foodstuffs, which by the early 20th century with Hobbs would have become commonplace. But a period where artists are picking up on, like Duncanson, picking up on what one art historian has recently called the fruits of empire. Duncanson, of course, being an African-American artist who would have been looking to the sort of sweet produce of pineapple, honeycomb, and all those things as a substitute for a commodity like sugar with its ties to the economy of slavery. So these are sweet things that are not entangled in the same way with slavery. But Hobbs, continuing that tradition, that his forerunners like Duncanson and even the family of the Peels a few decades earlier really inaugurated in American art.
So Nellie Little Hale Murphy is probably the most difficult artist to find information about, mostly because she was overshadowed by her husband and a lot of her work. Her husband, Herman Murphy, was also a painter, but I don't think that discredits her work at all. She was born in California, but moved to Boston, again in this New England scene, to further her artistic studies. And she's celebrated mostly for her watercolor flowers and landscapes, just like Alice Shillay, who we looked at before. And she made a career, in addition to her main watercolors, of illustrating children's books. This practice was not unusual for women artists, women American artists, as often their main medium did not always provide a steady income for them. And this painting is, again, a still life and perhaps reminiscent, at least of the Northern Europe tradition of the 17th century, but as you can tell, it looks a bit different from the still lifes we were just looking at. There's not that dramatic lighting and chiaroscuro of the background. Instead, we get kind of this even light applied to the wisteria plant, almost as if it's in studio lighting. And some of the wisteria flowers are falling and dying. Some, in fact, are on the table there, and some are discolored and on their way out, representing the repetitive and final nature of life. And Murphy's still life does not exemplify the same naturalism as the great masters or the ones we just looked at before, nor does it have the textural qualities in paint or loose brushstrokes or even atmospheric qualities of American Impressionists. In fact, the forms are quite flat, which I think, again, can be associated with watercolor, the medium. All this to say, I think Murphy's work is another example of the eclecticism of American art at this time. Yeah.
Well, and I think maybe there's a way of looking at Murphy in light of some artistic influences that are coming not from the West, but from the East, and the floral subject matter of Asian art. Here we have Charles Courtney Curran's Oriental Still Life, showing this interest in Asian art, but through sort of the material culture that has been imported to the U.S., the lacquer table, the ceramics, both vases and bowls, and also figural forms. Curran is sort of showing Asian art as it is consumed by a Western audience, and so seems to be the case with Lillian Burke's Meeser, who in this case is using the colors and I think the sort of formal expressive nature of decorated ceramic ware, which you see with the vase and the lidded pot on the left and the bowl. Here, merging those colors and forms with a language of pointillism, which here is where kind of East meets West with European artists like Seurat and others who really embraced this notion of pointillism being, creating colors and light and shadow and form through the juxtaposition of single points of pigment on a canvas, using two colors to create another. But I think you really get a sense of kind of the vibrancy, the vitality of these decorative objects as they then are further informing Meeser's work as a painter. The bird too, it's sort of in the way that the talons are of the bird and the blossoms on the branches relate to one another. There's this kind of ambiguity of space here. Is it an actual bird or is it a bird on a hanging textile or something in the background? And that kind of purposeful confusion, but also in the process, the bird becomes that much more dynamic if it's swooping down towards the flowers rather than just a static thing. So these works with Meeser and Curran show again how Asian aesthetics are entering into the making of American art in the early 20th century, just as they influenced, European artists like, we want a famous example with Van Gogh, who looked to Japanese woodblock prints. Here we see kind of another way in which Asian art is making its way into this longer story of artistic experimentation from the late 19th into the 20th century. Now, I guess we can leave this image up because I'm realizing the time, and I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for question and answer. Feel free to drop any questions you have into the Q&A box. You can click on that button and type anything in that you are wondering. We'll field those questions from you. But I'll start us off with a question for Meghan, and the question is just what was your favorite part of working on this project? What do you feel like was kind of the most rewarding aspect of being involved in a project like this?
Yeah, thank you. I would have to say my favorite part is probably just collecting the research. I think it was challenging, but it was very rewarding and fun, because I don't think like at that time in my coursework I have really gotten to do that kind of research, and just learning the process and be able to practice that was really rewarding and enjoyable, and it made it that much more special when I could go see it in person and realize all these artworks and see them manifested on the wall in the way that you guys had put them together. Yeah.
Well, and so there's a shameless plug then for the importance of these internships, and how much, as I said in the beginning, we value that being in the museum and being able to offer those opportunities. I'm sure it's a lot different writing an art history paper than one I know from my own past experience. To write an art history paper is one thing, to bring an exhibition together in real space and time in a gallery is a much different one. So we just are so glad we can offer those kinds of opportunities to you that hopefully complement your work in the classroom. So
I have a question.
We've got a couple questions in the box here.
I have a question too, Jeff, but
yeah.
I'll let you get to those first, and then I'll ask mine when you're finished with those.
Okay. So Meghan, how did you feel about sharing your research with a public audience, with the people coming to the galleries to see these paintings and the research that ended up in the labels?
Yeah, so that was definitely a new experience for me, but I think it made it, again, like all the more rewarding, because like you said, writing our art history paper is different, and you don't always get to share it with people and have this kind of like physical space or object that you can share with people. So that was really special to be able to share it with people that I know, and know that people that I've never met have seen it. And it's a very rewarding, and it's a great experience. But it was new, but I think it's something that should be open for all students to experience if possible.
So we have another question about how this whole exhibition came about and how we narrowed down our choices, which I can partially answer, and Meghan can weigh in too. Barbara Guillaume, again, as I mentioned, is one of our board members. I think she's listening in. Hi, Barbara. She offered to lend us these works from her collection in late 2019 on an extended loan. And so we knew we'd have these works here, and what better way to really, again, offer a unique and important practical experience to students than to allow someone like Meghan to work on this exhibition. The collection, as I also mentioned before, includes several works by European artists, as well as a few works on paper, the Cooper being one of them. In terms of how we chose what would be in the exhibition, of course, the shuffle and recovery that happened after being shut down due to COVID last year, this exhibition had to sort of move from one space to another as we were finding our way with our larger calendar and ensuring that there would be a devoted space for the exhibition. It started out in a space with lots of windows, which meant that we could not include works on paper, and that automatically narrowed our choices. But then, things didn't stay the same for long as if you were in our meetings about our exhibition calendar, you'd know. So when it moved again, we were able to expand the checklist slightly to include a few works on paper that otherwise wouldn't have been seen. So it was a matter of both sort of practical considerations as well as this focusing on this larger idea of echoes from abroad and an American artist's influence from again, not just Europe, but Latin America and Asia, and how this collection really captures that idea. Meghan, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that's perfect. Exactly my thoughts too.
Colin, did you have a question you wanted to jump in with?
I did. It's for Meghan also. Sorry, Jeff. I was wondering if you could talk about like what was like the most surprising or maybe challenging aspect of putting an exhibition together that you kind of learned throughout this process that maybe you didn't expect before you started.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say uniquely this project interrupted by COVID, kind of understanding those protocols and like how that applies to museum work in general was definitely an interesting learning curve, and how it affected this exhibition was interesting to know about. But in general, I think probably the most challenging part, I would say, I would have to say like knowing the entire timeline and, amount of people that are involved. I don't think you realize that it involves a lot of people to get an exhibition up, and it's a very long timeline, and it relies on a lot of certain things falling into place. And while those things can be tedious, they're very important to museums' operation. And I think it's very helpful for just museum work in general. And yeah, and obviously I think it worked out pretty well in this instance. And it was, a great rewarding learning experience to have.
Yeah, I think all that is so true. And I think it's people, maybe don't always realize how much happens behind the scenes, and all the different people who have to work really closely together as a team to get a show up on the walls and get the information out there to share it with the public. And I think you did a really great job doing it. It's a challenge to mount an exhibition in the best of times, but during a global pandemic, you really got kind of like the full experience to prepare you for a lot of different things that could happen in the future. So I think you did a great job. Congrats.
Thank you. And I should add to that, that everyone here at the museum is great to work with, and they've made the process really easy and fun to learn about. And yeah.
I don't know if anybody else has any other questions. Meghan, did you have a question or
Yeah, sure. I have a question for you.
Okay.
How'd you come up with the title for the exhibition?
That's a good question. I think so. One of the things that you said in the beginning that's important for kind of understanding the development of American art is that American artists were not just sort of plainly and blindly copying European artists, that there's this kind of transformation that happens between their encounters with European or Latin American or Asian art, and how they sort of process and formulate its expressive form for their own work and for an American audience. And so an echo is not the same thing as the original sound, if that makes sense. That an echo is kind of an alteration of it can sound different. It can be in terms of volume, in terms of tone. And so it seemed to me a kind of fitting metaphor for this transformation and alteration of foreign artistic styles as they are then purposed by American artists. If that, I hope the metaphor works, but yeah, I think it's a way of also that that sound. We can sort of give a visual quality to it too. That's kind of my best answer. I also was just trying to give it a title that, find something that someone hadn't really used before. And for all I know, there is another Echoes from Abroad exhibition out there, but I wanted to, something that I hope is at least slightly unique. But that's a great question. Well, I think we are just about to time here. And I want to thank everybody who's here tuning in, including I see someone put in the chat that they're in Boston, and just very grateful that these kinds of programs exist so that people can experience the art on the walls of the Georgia Museum of Art, even if they can't physically travel here. I've seen a number of comments congratulating Meghan. I want to congratulate her too, again, for her work on this. Thank you, Barbara, for sharing your collection with us. And again, thank you all for tuning in. We'll look forward to seeing you again at more programs. But for now, take care and stay well.